Hello, everybody, and welcome to Inside the Champions Paddock. I am your host, Stinky Juan, and I am here with Broken Hypocrite, aka Brian Miller.
Hey, everybody, how you doing?
All right, so today we're going to be talking about a few things. We'll be going over essentially the drivers, the team lineups. We'll go into clips of the week, so we'll have that as well. We're going to talk a little bit about Silverstone.
Yep.
And we will go over a little bit of a tech talk. I guess we could just look at the lineups here. Yeah, so we had a few drivers change, right? So we had a few lineup changes. We have Alfa Romeo is going to have the team principal of Pangil. He moved from Haas to Alfa Romeo.
Right.
And their drivers are going to be Alex, aka Sway, and Cookie, Mr. Cookie OP.
Yeah, Cookie's new to our league anyways.
Yeah, so that's a rookie driver there. We have the AlphaTauri has a new team principal of Luke, who used to be on McLaren.
Yeah, he was a driver and a principal.
Yeah, and the drivers actually are staying the same with Dust and Lungi. So that's an interesting one there. Both drivers staying. They get a new team principal. Lungi moves up outside. He was, I believe, their team principal before. Now he's just a driver.
Right.
We have Alpine with the same team principal of Iverson. So he keeps that position. And we have Druid comes in and finally gets a seat.
Full-time seat.
With Alpine's full-time seat there. And we also have Hulk there staying on the Alpine team. So we're looking to get some points for that team again. Keep them outside of the bottom of the brackets there. We have the Aston Martin team changes. So we have Chalupa there becoming the new team principal. And we have Landon moves there from Williams.
My old teammate.
Your old teammate, yeah. And we have Kumar there. He was I think he was a Red Bull, and then he went to Ferrari a bit.
Yep.
He's going to be the other driver for the Aston Martin team. We have Ferrari gets a new driver here of Aguilera. And so that's another rookie driver. And we also have Hill. So he finally moves away after 2 seasons, moves away from the Mercedes team and goes to Ferrari.
Yeah, a big move, excited. But hey, it's Hamilton did the same thing, so we'll see how it goes.
And then their team principal is Tafari, which he was a engineer for the Aston Martin team. So that's I think that's a person to keep an eye on. That Ferrari team might do well, as we saw the Aston Martin team being able to get a World Drivers' Championship with his help.
And Aguilera is a new driver for us as well, another rookie. But he's looking pretty strong. And then if Safari is, doing engineering things for them too, it could be a strong team.
Yeah, be a strong team there. We have Haas now. A very surprising group here. We have the team principal of Art there is going to be running it. He was a former driver, now is a team principal. And we have Miller,
That's right.
and Ritzy. So that's going to be a fun one. A North American team. Actually a North American team there. So that'll be fun to watch. We have the McLaren team is going to be backed by KO. So he's going to be the team principal of that team. He moved from Alfa Romeo. And he's going to have Anders and a Renzo.
Yeah,
so
another really strong team.
Yeah, I'm curious to see, because Anders came in really late last season. So he's technically like a rookie, you can say.
I would call him a rookie,
about 3 of them. Yeah, I didn't really do a full season. So, it could be, it's up in the air really how well he could do, but he did show really good promise, really good pace. The last race we did, and we have Renzo there finally getting to hopefully be a #1 driver. We'll see.
Yeah, is he out of
have a chance?
Is he out of Limp's shadow?
He finally gets to try to race on his own. I'm excited to see them race each other, because that we haven't really got to see that, as he came in the league and pretty much was a teammate of William for most of his career here. So that's going to be a fun one to watch. We have Mercedes team principal still Jay from Wolfpack Performance. It does retain Paul. He stays there, but he also gets James, or Wildcat. Comes from, I believe Wildcat was on Alpha Tauri at one point, and then
I think so,
was
yeah.
a reserve. So like he's technically it's could be considered a rookie as well. He's very experienced though, so it's not an issue on that case.
Yep.
So we'll see if the Mercedes team will be able to.
Also, Mercedes is the only team so far that has signed a reserve driver. So Racer X210.
No, there's a few. We also have the Aston Martin team signed Lorhens.
That's right.
To a reserve contract as well. And I believe there's one more somewhere out there floating around. I don't think it's been confirmed, but there is one. But that's a all-American team, or all-US team actually, of
Mercedes
and Paul. So it's going to be an interesting one to watch. And then right after it, we have the Red Bull team, team principled by Sunby. So we'll see how he'll be able to transition from driver to team principal here.
Yeah.
And he's going to have the drivers of Nikolai and William.
Very strong.
Very strong Norwegian team. These two looked really good in the preseason. And that makes me, it's really exciting. It's going to be interesting to see this Red Bull team. They haven't really, we haven't seen a Red Bull team do well in our league yet in the Champions Series. So it'll be interesting to see how well they can do here.
Mm-hmm.
We do, and then last but not least, the World Constructors Champion, team principal Cefalino stays on. Loses both his drivers, but gets good replacements, I think, so of Spicy and Will.
Yeah, with Spicy being a rookie as well, but someone I've raced with in other leagues, and he's very strong.
Yeah, and Will was a reserve last season, so he's finally getting an actual full-time seat. So that's going to be interesting to see, because you do prepare a little bit different when you're actually a full-time driver and a reserve.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see their pace from that. And then do we want to talk about the clip of the day, or the clip of the week that we...
Yeah. So every week, we're going to ask you to submit your video clips from essentially the race that we had previously. So you'll just go on the YouTube, find our last live race, watch it, clip the exciting parts that you liked, and then just submit them to a channel that we'll have for you. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to choose a winner every week. And that winner is going to be like put in for a drawing at the end of the season, and then we'll give away a prize, which I think we're going to give away a mug branded by DZP.
Yeah, so the grand prize is a DZP t-shirt, and the extra winner will be a DZP mug, at least
that's right.
It says on
that's
here.
right. So we're going to have two winners.
Yes.
So we'll pull two
winners
names.
of drawings at the end of the season.
So really simple. Anybody in our community can submit a clip of the week. And then we'll choose the one that we like best. We'll talk about it in this video. And then, we'll put you in for a drawing for doing that.
Yeah, so that's open to all DZP members.
Yep.
our upcoming race, Silverstone.
I think we should.
British Grand Prix.
It's a great track.
A very fun track. There's 18 turns. Do you want to talk about the setup that you have created for them, at least a baseline?
Yeah. So this setup here is something very, very close to what I'll be running. I might be running this exact setup. I don't know. I haven't done my final checks on it yet. But this is what I was running last season. We were here. And it worked really, really well for me. So one thing you'll notice is the arrow is exactly as it is in the TT setup. The reason I didn't adjust it much is you need that straight line speed, and this track isn't so bad on tires. So for me, keeping the TT arrow works really well. Then if you go down to differential,
yep.
Most people here will run around 55 on the on throttle. I decrease that to 50 because it helps with tire wear a little bit. So when you lock the tire or the differential, the more and more you lock it, the more the tires rotate at the same speed, which means you're probably going to get a little more wheel spin, which will increase your tire wear. So typically I lower that all the way down to 50. Sometimes I'll keep it at 55 depending on the track, because you do get a little more traction, or I guess speed out of corners, if you have a higher differential. So there are spots on the track I might increase it to 55 while I'm driving. For example, Stowe is a very good corner. You might want to increase it to 55 for. But most of the track I'll be running 50%. And then your off throttle. A lot of people don't realize this, but this is a good setting that you can use to kind of balance your car when you're off throttle. So 51 works really, really well for me. If you go with lower, if you go 50, you're actually going to get a little bit more rotation out of the car, which in some of these corners, I'm thinking like
Beckett's Chapel.
No, I'm thinking like the lower speed, like farm and that little
really slow.
Yeah, sector 2, the start of sector 2, I guess end of sector 1. Anyways,
yeah, it's right at the end of sector.
Yeah, if you're at 50 on the off throttle, you might get a little bit more rotation than you want. But this is something you can play with a little bit. Anywhere between 50 and 55, if you adjust it back and forth, you'll notice your car rotation changes a little bit. That's something you can play with. Okay, so then the suspension settings. Normally, everyone will run max, min is what standard is. And the reason for that is tire wear. And also, when you have more negative camber, you might get a little bit more grip under like high-speed corners. But not always. This game is weird. You should be, but not always. So I guess the standard for most drivers is to go max, min. Here though, I am going a little bit less than max with the rear camber. So I'm getting a little bit more negative rear camber. Some people go way more aggressive with this. I think the TT right now is minimum, so they're at -2. But if you do that, you're going to get higher rear tire wear. So I kind of compromised a little bit my tire wear by not going -1, by going a little bit more negative camber. But it's really going to help Maggots and Beckett's really, and Stowe a little bit. That's where it's going to help a lot. And you could go a little lower. You can go like -1.5 maybe. But if you go too negative, you're going to get more rear tire wear. So just be careful of that. Then suspension, I think this is really close to TT. And the reason I didn't adjust it much is because the suspension is set up really good for those, Maggots and Beckett's and the fast switching, back and forth cornering, high speed. So you want this pretty much how it is. You'll notice the front ride height and the rear ride height is like very level. In a lot of other cars, you're kind of pointed more down. But here we're a little more leveled off, and that helps with your straight line speed, and it helps when you're switching direction a lot. So yeah, I wouldn't adjust this too much. If you're going to adjust it, to make better tire wear and to make the car more like compliant, although maybe a little more understeery, is you would lower the front suspension, and maybe lower the rear suspension as well a little bit. That'll give you a little bit better tire wear, but it will be a little more sluggish. And then for the brakes, brake pressure is always going to be 100. Don't ever go lower than that. And then your front brake bias, I'm running 55. I usually go between 54 and 56. And then if the track needs more trail braking, I usually go more towards the rear. And if it needs less trail braking, I usually go more towards the front. So 55
when you
here.
say more towards the rear, you're talking about more towards 50%.
Yeah.
And
but I rarely go under 54%.
Yeah.
Because then you're going to start locking the rears and
locking the rears. Yeah.
So if you have problems with locking the rears, go more towards the front. So go more like 56, 57. Otherwise go lower. Go as low as you can on most tracks without locking the rear.
I think brake bias is always overlooked too. I know that sometimes on the day of, you can, like, that's a very movable setting, because maybe the temperature of the track is a little bit colder, right? That means you could kind of move it back a little bit if your rears are getting a little too, if your setup made it to where your rears are a little bit too cold, maybe you actually want to wear it a little bit more, so you get a lot more rotation by doing it. So that's something you can change, not only just during the race, but you can literally change corner to corner. You can, yeah.
So in the harder braking zones, you want to go a little bit more forward, and then in the braking zones where you're trail braking, you want to go a little more rearward. And then also, if your tires just start acting up, you can change it to adjust as well. Same with the differential, the on-throttle differential. You can adjust that as well during the race, and it will affect, how you get out of the corners. And it'll also affect how quickly your tires warm up. And then tire pressure, this is something, because we have Park for May on, you can't change. So you want to make sure you set up for the race, not for quali. So this is set up to hopefully balance the tire temperatures. So the fronts won't get too hot, but they'll get hot enough that they're in the good operating window. And the rears, they can get pretty hot, so you want to just go minimum on the tire pressures. You might be able to go a little higher on the fronts, but just be careful you don't overheat. And
I think tire pressure sometimes, I think, is overlooked. Some of the drivers, because they run in TT instead of doing like a GP or something. So I think, like, depending on how your setup is, sometimes, like, I noticed that I have to add a little bit more pressure, because I'm like, the tires aren't warming, or they're not warming up enough or something, to where, like, you can, like, give it more pressure to make it warm up quicker. Like, it is like,
warm up quicker and maintain that heat.
It's one of the ways you can adjust to maintain heat. Also for wear, so tires is an easy way to adjust the wear on your tires. So when you do a practice run on pace, you can see, like, how uneven your wear on your tires are. You can adjust technically your pressures, and that would help a little bit.
Yeah, and the reason
looking at pressure,
the reason it helps is because how hot your tires are, or if they go over the optimal operating window temperature, then they'll start wearing quicker. So if that's happening a lot, you want to lower them to get that tire wear in check.
Yeah, down.
Yeah, and I
feel
mean,
tire pressure is the easiest way to control the temps of your tires to over like some of these other settings. It's
and typically the TT settings have much higher tire pressures because temperature isn't taken into account in TT.
Exactly.
So then a lot of drivers will just take a TT setup and then lower the tire temperature or pressures all the way down to minimum so they don't overheat. But sometimes you want to add a little bit. Yeah, sometimes you want to add a little bit because you do want to try and balance the temperatures between the front and rear. There's even one track, I don't remember which one it is, but I actually had it offset a little bit left to right as well. It was Qatar. It was Qatar because
it's heavy.
You're constantly turning one direction. So that's something to think about, and you have to practice in Grand Prix mode to find what the pressures are.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because we're in a new season here, a lot of new drivers here. I think it's important we start talking a little bit about some of the game settings that you have, what you should be looking at with those settings, and then how to start practicing and training. So let's first start with the settings. So camera settings, this is a good place to start. Okay, so these camera settings that we have up here right now, I'm running these personally, and I believe they're almost identical to what Lucas Blakely runs. So the camera settings don't really matter too much as long as you like them. That's what's really, really important. Now, I would recommend that you run TV Pod because it takes you back out of the cockpit and puts you a little higher and gets you looking down on those front wheels. So you can kind of see where your front wheels are located on track. That helps a lot. And then these adjustments here, they just bring me a little bit more forward so that I'm not sitting so far back. So these really, really work for me. But you can adjust them, find what you like, and then stick with that. The two settings, though, that I would highly, highly, highly recommend you change from standard is camera shake and camera movement. Put them at 0.
It's so bad.
And the reason for this is if your camera is moving around while you're driving, you're not going to get as much benefit from the visual cues of the game of what's happening if you're just shaking around all the time. It might look kind of cool because you're like, oh yeah, I'm hitting bumps and I'm shaking and the camera's moving when I'm turning. Okay, it looks kind of cool, but it's not going to help you as a driver. And in fact, it's going to make it harder for you to learn how to catch the car from the visual cues that the game gives you. So turn those to 0. Everything else you can play with until you find a setting you like. But this is what I use. So that's all I have to say about camera settings. But also, once you find a setting that you like, stick with it. Don't change it constantly because it will mess with your brain. And those visual cues that you're getting from the game, it'll affect that. So those are settings you don't want to touch after you find settings you like. All right. So assists, so this is one of those that's kind of user preference and what skill level you're at. But if you're able, you want to turn off all assists. You want to be on the elite driving proficiency, have everything turned off. That includes racing line, that includes anti-lock brakes. And if you're comfortable with it, I would recommend that anytime you're training, you run with all assists off. That doesn't necessarily mean that you will be running this anytime you're practicing or running in league races, because there are two settings in here that will not affect your race pace, but might help you be more consistent. Those two settings are anti-lock brakes, and then dynamic racing line. So if you have those things turned on, or maybe racing line turned on to corners only, it might help you as a driver. However, both of those settings will make it harder for you to improve your own driving if you have them on when you're training and maybe even practicing. So I highly recommend that you have those off when you are practicing, because it'll just make you a better driver. With anti-lock brakes, it makes you learn how to control the car with the brakes better if you have it turned off. And manipulating the balance of the car with your brakes and with your throttle is a really good skill to learn. And you can't do that if you have traction control on and anti-lock brakes on. So when you are training, you should have those turned off. Racing line, a lot of people have a hard time turning it off, and I get it. I run it for like 80% of the tracks because I don't practice enough to be confident that I know where my braking zones are. So I get it. But places like Silverstone, I turn it off because I've practiced that track so much with it off. I've done iRacing with it where you don't really usually have a racing line. So I don't need it there anymore. And the more and more tracks you can run it off and not need it because you know the track so well, the better driver you're going to be. So yeah, so I highly recommend that you turn everything off when you're training. Now,
I think racing line is one of those hard ones because
it's very hard.
Like, yeah, it's your initial advantage from using it is just so good. It's so much. And like it helps when you get distracted. You can still recover sometimes. But it does do that. It creates this aid that you technically never needed. You just chose to use it, and it helps you.
Yeah. And
but I will say it takes longer. So if you don't have the time, just turn on racing line. There is no reason not to. But if you have the time, yeah, try to avoid it if you can, because it helps so much more if you can just run without it.
I mean, I'm sure every driver here that's watching this video, they know that the racing line shown on track is not the ideal racing line. And even though they have it on, they're never quite following it. They're just using it for braking points and like where their turn-in points are. But I will tell you that if you learn to drive with it off, you will be a much better driver, especially when you're driving against people and you're trying to choose different racing lines to throw them off and to make a move. You're just going to be better at that if you learn to drive with it off.
Or they're so used to it, right, that when a driver is in front of them, now they don't know where to brake.
Exactly.
They use that braking line as a braking board, essentially.
Yeah. So yeah. And then all these other assists, some of you will be running traction control on either partial or
medium.
Full.
It's
medium or full.
And full. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, if you need it because you lose the rear end, that's fine. Try to, in your times that you're training, try to turn it off or at least turn it down to medium, step by step, get better and better at it, because it is costing you time. You are slower with traction control on. Obviously, if you're spinning out all the time, you will be slower with it off. But if you aren't spinning out, traction control costs you time. So turn that off as soon as you're comfortable, because it will hurt you. Drift assist isn't anything that we have to worry about because it's only for the other cars in the game, not for F1 cars. Manual gearbox, it's not that hard. Learn how to drive manual gearboxes if you're not already, because the game will shift at weird places or not downshift at the right time. You have more control of your car and more control of the balance of the car too when you're shifting. So put it on manual. It's not that hard to learn. And then
there's also manual suggested, which I guess it isn't that great though. It's not always right.
Yeah, there's manual suggested, which you can use so that you know what suggested thing. That's fine, as long as you're still doing it yourself. But yeah, sometimes the suggested isn't what you should be doing. Usually you want a little higher than what they suggest. So, all right, and then pit assist and pit release assist, we require those off in our league, so learn how to enter the pits without these assists. ERS and DRS assist, I don't remember. I think we have them off in our league.
They're off because it's everything that gives you technically an advantage, because you would get like it's technically you could get like milliseconds on some of these. Like it's not crazy, but it's aids that which you would get advantage for. That's why traction control and anti-lock, you can turn them on because it doesn't actually help you.
Right. So yeah, so turn these off. So. Yeah, so I mean, I guess that's all I have to say about assist. Basically, you want as many of them off as possible because you're going to be a better driver. But if you are racing and maybe you jumped in without much practice, yes, you can have anti-lock brakes on. It's not going to slow you down. In fact, it might make you slightly faster or more consistent. And yes, you can have racing light on, of course. But I would highly encourage everybody to turn everything off when they're training. That's that. Okay, so the last one I think is force feedback settings.
Vibrations and force feedbacks.
Yeah, so this is your wheel settings that you can change in game. Some of you, very few of you, are on controller, so these don't really affect you. But if you're on a steering wheel, I would have you consider looking at these, seeing what you're running. These are my settings, and they're not going to be what everyone runs. The reason I have force feedback down to 24 is because I have a very strong steering wheel, and my settings for my steering wheel that aren't in-game settings, but my steering wheel settings, I have the force feedback turned all the way up and the strength all the way up. But then in-game, I minimize it so that it's not ripping my arms off, and so my arms aren't tired at the end of the game. Or at the end of the race. And I do like to turn this down as much as I can where I still have feeling. The reason for that is I can react a little bit quicker if the wheel's not pulling on me so hard. And it doesn't make me tired. But I still get the feeling I need out of the wheel, out of the force feedback. So play with this. If you've been running it like really, really high, maybe try turning it down and see how it does for you. Okay, then we have on-track effects. You can run this however you like, but I, again, highly recommend you turn it down really low. I have it at 1 just so I can feel a little bit of the bumps and everything. But even if you have it at 0, you're still going to get some of that on-track effect feelings. They're just going to be very low. So you can run 0, you can run 5, but I don't recommend running really high because then your wheel's going to be pulling all over the place just from bumps and camber and stuff in the track. And that information isn't anything to do with the rear end coming out or anything. It's just extra information that your brain doesn't really need. So turn that down low. Same goes with rumble, off track, turn those down too. You can go a little higher than what I have, but even at 0, you're going to get those effects through the wheel. They're just going to be, much lower than what they are if you turn them up. So yeah, try turning all these settings down and see how it does for you. Wheel damper, I run 0. Some people run 1. Almost no one else, pro drivers anyways, run anything higher than that. And the reason for that is it kind of pulls your wheel back center, this wheel damper. I don't like it when it's constantly pulling on me back to center. So I have it off. If you do like it pulling back to center a little bit, put it on 1, but don't go higher than that. That's my recommendation. You can change it if you want, but every F1 sim driver runs it at 0 or 1. Maximum wheel rotation. This is one that you can play with a little bit. I would recommend anywhere between like 280 and 360. The lower you go, the less you need to turn the wheel to reach full lock. So your car is going to be more responsive, lower wheel rotation. The higher you go, of course, the opposite. So you can turn a little bit more before you reach full lock. So the steering inputs you give to it won't affect the car so drastically. So if you're having trouble like wiggling around a lot, maybe turn it up a little bit so it'll decrease that effect. But if you want to be able to react quicker to things, turn it down. But it will make you, again, it will make you, any movement you put into the car, it's going to be more aggressive the lower you go. So it might also affect things like your tire wear if you have it too low.
Yeah.
So yeah, so play with this, but I would again recommend somewhere between 280 and 360. You can go higher, you can go lower, but that's about the range that most sim drivers use, 280 to 360.
Yeah. One thing I try to do usually with this is try to match the steering rotation of your actual wheel with the wheel originally, and then maybe adjust from there. Because depending on the diameter of your wheel, not all the wheels are the same. There's no like, I think like yours is a full size, right, wheel base, and not most, or the diameter of it is like a normal wheel, right?
Yeah, well, mine is like a replica of an F1 wheel, so I think it's about 290 centimeters diameter.
But most of the wheels that you're going to get are going to be smaller. It's going to be slightly smaller diameter, so you're going to want that rotation isn't going to be, it probably won't be like 320, but it'll be close to that, so you just adjust based on that.
And this is another thing too about these settings. These settings are not as important as like maybe your camera settings. Because you can adjust them a little bit, and you're always going to learn and improve while adjusting them.
Yeah.
So one thing actually that I recommend to some people, kind of like a way to hack your brain, is when you're training and you're like running in TT and you're doing a bunch of laps, every 5 laps or so, go ahead and change these settings like drastically. Let's just move them around, turn the strength up, turn your wheel rotation around, change them up, maybe even go into your actual wheel settings and change those around. Every like 5 laps, just do that. Because what is going to happen when you're doing that is basically you're going to start learning more from the visual cues that the game gives you, like when the rear starts to pop out, because the force feedback is going to constantly be different, but the visual cues are going to always be the same. And so you're going to learn more, your brain is going to learn more anyways, about the visual cues from the game than from the force feedback. And so you just constantly keep changing it and adjusting it. And what that's going to do is 2 things. Is, again, your brain's going to learn the visual cues. But number 2 is you're going to start finding different force feedback settings that you like more. Because you don't always have to run the same force feedback settings. However, when you're done training and you're going into practicing for an event, stick with the same force feedback. So take your force feedback settings that you really like, put those in, do all of your practice for the race with those settings, because then you're going to get comfortable with the force feedback through the wheel, and hopefully you also learned a little bit while you were training with the visual cues that you get from the game. And arguably the visual cues from the game are more important, especially for things like catching the rear end when it starts to kick out on you, than the force feedback is. So that's why I highly recommend this type of training, when you have time to do it, because it will make you a better driver, and it will help you find settings that you like. But this also does, require you to have camera settings set that you like, and you're not going to change those around, because then it will affect with those visual cues, and that you don't want to do that. You want to keep those camera settings static all the time. All right. So with all that said, I've been throwing out the words training and practice a lot. And those 2 things are different.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't realize that. Tell me what
the difference are about training and practice. The main differences about it.
So practice is applying what you learned. And then in the case of sim racing, practice is what you're doing to prepare for an event. Training is learning how to improve something or learning how to do something new. So throughout, just this season, you're going to be doing a lot of different training, hopefully, if you have time. where again, like I said, maybe you're changing the force feedback settings around and you're NTT and you're training, you're trying to learn something new, trying to learn a new racing line. You're trying to learn how to change your settings, like you're trying to turn off traction control, let's say. All that is going to be training things. You're trying to learn something new. Training can also be outside the game. Maybe you're working on improving your reaction time or your hand-eye coordination. Like one thing I used to do a lot is like throw a ball against the wall, just like improve those things. Because the more you improve those things, the better you're going to be in the game. So all those types of things are training. But then when you're preparing for a race, hopefully you have time to practice. And what practice is you're no longer in TT, you're no longer doing all these like little things outside of a Grand Prix. You're going to load into a Grand Prix. You're going to put the race setup on that you're going to use. You're going to put the settings to everything you're going to use. So if you're going to run no traction control, if you're going to run no ABS in the race, then make sure you have that when you're practicing. And you want to practice what you're going to be doing. So you're going to run into a GP. You're going to put on that car setup that you're going to run, that you plan on running. You might adjust it a little bit while you're practicing. That's fine. But yeah, you want to basically be running everything that you're planning on doing in the race. So that's how practice is a little bit different. And I would encourage everybody to at least do 1 or 2 Grand Prix of practice before an event. If you do that, you're going to prepare yourself to, you know, you're going to know more about what fuel load you need to run. You're going to know more about when you should be pitting. It might change based on safety cars and things like that, but you'll have a better idea of what lap you're going to come in. You're going to be comfortable with the race start. You're going to be comfortable with, you know, just driving against, you're probably going to be in AI while you're doing your practice. That's fine, racing against AI. Yeah. But like, you're going to learn a little bit how you're going to be driving offline and everything. It's different than when you're training in TT. So I would encourage everybody to at least get 1 race in, hopefully 2. If you can get more, that's great. I engineer for Paul in another series, and Paul is awesome with practice. He probably does like 8 practice Grand Prix before each event.
Nice.
So yeah, he gets and he's doing really, really well in the series. I think he's P2. So it does pay off to practice, and it does pay off to train. But if you don't have time to do both, you should at least practice for the event you're going to do.
So what I got from that, my summation is training is more like an individual goal. So doing like trying to beat a TT time, maybe getting doing a physical thing like a reaction time kind of thing, things like that. Little goals to improve your racing essentially. And then practice is where you're looking at an actual event or some like group of events or something, and you're actually doing. So it's like a goal of, oh yeah, let's try to do the Grand Prix from this position, do that run, and it's always in the same spot, right? Like it's about that event and things like that. So it's more localized.
So I think training is going to be something where you might find bigger gains from, as far as like your ultimate skill level will go up and up and up the more you train. But the more you practice for an event, the more you're going to be consistent in that event. And I would say that, you should be doing both, but when you're practicing, it's really going to set you up to score well in the event. If you don't have time to practice, you might not be very consistent. You might make a mistake during the race that will just cost you a lot of positions, a lot of points. So yeah, I mean, every time I don't practice, I make mistakes. I'll spin once. I'll do something dumb in the race. Like, but then if I do 1 Grand Prix of practice, I learn something. I realize what I need to do, and I put it into practice.
Improving skill over and then improving consistency, essentially.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And there's always crossover, right? A little bit of bleed over for both.
We will be doing this every week after our race.
Yep.
And I believe we agreed that we're going to try and get these done and posted by Wednesday.
Yep.
So that you guys all have time to see what we talked about, and maybe even put some of the things that I talked about in the tech conversation about, you know, how you're going to practice and train and all that. And so hopefully you also have setups that you can use or tweak a little bit for yourself. So we're going to be doing all that, and we encourage you all to comment on this video about things you want us to talk about in future videos.
Exactly.
So if you want me to talk about a certain, let's say, driving technique like trail braking, let me know in the comments. I'm definitely going to talk about that and other driving techniques like weight transfer and everything. So, you know, let me know what you want to do, what you want us to talk about, and I'll work on
let us know what you guys
compiling that.
But for next week, we'll be doing the clip of the week from the British Grand Prix. We'll be talking about telemetry in the talks. We'll also be talking about the next race. So we'll be going over that, and we will, you know, just talk, depending on what you guys want. We'll talk about that stuff as well. Yeah. So this was Inside the Champions Paddock. I was your host, Stinky One. I was here with Broken Hypocrite. Yep. And we'll see you guys all next time.
All right. See you later.